She had no food, no water, no money. Only one thing kept her walking: hope. The wind howled like a wounded animal across the open plains, dragging with a shroud of dust that stung the eyes and turned the sky to copper. Her steps were slow now, barely steps at all, just a tired sway forward, one foot after another, as if the earth itself resisted her will to keep going. Sarah Green didn't know what day it was anymore. She'd stopped counting after the third sunrise. Her shoes had split days ago, and the skin on her heels had long since surrendered to the raw cruelty of the journey. She had no map, no food, and no certainty, just a torn envelope with a name scrawled across it and a direction: west. Her lips were cracked from thirst, her dress stiff with sweat and dust. The book clutched to her chest. A thin volume of Emily Dickinson was all that hadn't failed her. She read it aloud at night under the stars, when coyotes howled and fear tried to convince her to turn back. But there was nothing behind her. The mining town had collapsed. The school shuttered. Even the children had disappeared, carted away with their families to chase some new rumor of work. Sarah had stayed until the last desk was empty, until the landlord nailed the door shut and told her to leave. She didn't cry then. Not when they took her room, not when her final paycheck vanished in a whisper of bureaucratic forgetfulness. But now, walking into nothingness, her throat stung with salt she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't supposed to be how it ended. She wasn't supposed to break. A sharp stone bit into her foot, and she stumbled. The satchel she wore flung forward and hit the dirt. She didn't move to retrieve it. Her knees followed her body down slowly, like a falling barn in slow collapse. The sky swirled above her, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if it was dusk or delirium. She blinked, forcing her head to lift. The plains stretched endlessly. No tree, no house, no sign of life. But she knew there was something, had to be. 50 more miles, they'd said. 50. And she could reach Riverbend, a quiet town with a schoolhouse that had lost its teacher in the last harsh winter. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She could teach again. She could be useful. She closed her eyes and pictured the small hands raised in class, the laughter echoing between cracked wooden walls, the way little Henry insisted on calling her Miss Green Bean and left her pebbles every morning as a gift. It was those memories that made the hunger bearable, that made her stand up again. She rose, slowly shaking, and retrieved her satchel. Inside was the envelope, her book, and a single apple core she hadn't dared throw away. She pressed her palm to her stomach, where hunger had become a permanent ache, and whispered, "Just a little more." Sarah had been poor her whole life, raised by her grandmother in a one-room cabin with firewood and silence. But even then, there had been dignity. There had been letters, pages written in looping script to distant cousins, to congressmen, to school boards. Letters filled with big words and bigger dreams. She had grown up believing that education wasn't just a way out, it was the way through. And that belief had carried her further than most. But belief didn't fill the pit in her stomach. It didn't protect her from the sun or the loneliness or the nights when she cried herself to sleep on the side of the road. A shadow flickered far off on the horizon. She froze, narrowing her eyes. A mirage? Another hallucination? Or maybe just another buzzard circling. She squinted again, but it was gone. She pushed forward. With every mile, her past became quieter. Her grandmother's voice, once so clear, had faded like the wind-carried smell of bread she used to bake on Sundays. Her students' laughter felt like echoes from another life. What remained was her conviction. Fragile, flickering, but alive. And then came the voice. Not outside. Inside. It was a boy's voice, young, proud, the kind only a teacher would remember. "You said we're never supposed to give up, Miss Green, even when it's hard." Her breath caught. That voice, Jacob. The boy who taught his little sister to read using twigs and dirt when books were too expensive. He believed in her. They all had. And if she stopped now, their belief would mean nothing. But her body didn't care about belief. Her knees buckled again, and she dropped hard. This time she couldn't get up. The dirt was warm beneath her cheek. Too warm. Her vision blurred the edges, and the sky rippled like a mirage. She reached blindly for her satchel, but missed. She began to drift, not sleep, but that dreamlike space between here and gone. Images played behind her eyes. The schoolhouse, the smell of chalk and wood, her students' smiles, her grandmother's hymn. Then hoofbeats. At first, she thought it was thunder, then silence, then hoofbeats again, closer this time. Her eyes cracked open. A silhouette moved across the glare, dark, wide-shouldered, on horseback. She couldn't make out a face, but the figure dismounted swiftly, boots kicking up sand. Strong hands lifted her gently, as if she were made of paper. She tried to speak, but no words came. He spoke, his voice calm and low, like running water. "I've got you." She wanted to ask who he was, where she was going, but the words dissolved on her tongue. The last thing she remembered was the smell of leather and pine, and the warmth of someone holding her like she mattered. And then everything went dark. Elijah Carter didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. Not since the day he buried both his wife and child beneath a cottonwood tree that stood like a sentinel behind his ranch house. The wind had howled the same way then, tearing at the chapel roof like it wanted to mourn with him. That was 10 years ago, but some things never softened. Not time, not silence, not grief. He'd spent that decade building the Carter Ranch into the biggest operation west of the Pecos. 20,000 acres, 400 head of cattle, a dozen ranch hands. Yet none of it filled the hollow space inside his chest. They called him rich. They called him hard. But never kind. Elijah preferred it that way. People kept their distance, and he didn't have to explain why his dinner table still had 3 settings, or why he never entered the nursery with the lace curtains and unopened crib. But that morning was different. He had ridden out early, chasing rumors of coyotes near the northern edge of his property. The sun hadn't fully risen, just cast its first orange light across the ridge when he spotted something slumped in the dust. At first, he thought it was a deer. Then he saw the shoes, torn leather, stained with blood. Then the hand, limp and pale, curled around a canvas satchel. He dismounted fast, his boots hitting the ground before the horse stopped. The body was so still he feared he was too late. Then she moved. Just a twitch. Barely enough to register. But it was enough. Her lips cracked apart and whispered something. A name maybe, or a word. He bent closer and caught the faintest sound. Lila. He didn't ask questions. Didn't wait for a sign. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the saddle like she weighed nothing. She didn't stir. Her head lolled against his chest, her skin burning hot. The ride back was silent, save for the occasional rasp of her breathing. Elijah kept one arm around her, steadying her in the saddle, while his other hand gripped the reins tight. His mind was already calculating. Water, food, clean sheets, Rose's care. But underneath the logistics was a hum he hadn't felt in years. A tug deep in his gut. Not quite fear, not quite hope. At the ranch house, Rosa opened the door with a frown that vanished the moment she saw the woman in Elijah's arms. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "She looks like she walked through fire." "She nearly did," Elijah muttered, stepping inside. They laid her in the guest room, the one Elijah never used. Rosa brought cool cloths, broth, and a basin of water. Elijah stood at the door, arms folded, jaw tight. He didn't know why he couldn't look away. "She's burning up," Rosa said. "Dehydrated. Starving. She's lucky you found her when you did. Elijah didn't reply. He didn't believe in luck either. That night, she woke up screaming. He was in the hallway when it happened, and he rushed in without thinking. Her eyes were wide, glazed with fever. She tried to sit up, gasping, fists clenched. "Shoo," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. "You're safe now." She looked at him like she wasn't sure whether he was real. Her lips moved, and he leaned in to catch the words. "Did I make it? Where were you going?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Anywhere better than where I was." He nodded slowly. "Then, yeah, you made it." She fell asleep moments later, as if his words had been a sedative. The next morning, Rosa gave him the satchel she'd found near her. Inside were 3 items: a tattered book of poems, an empty canteen, and a letter with a red stamp across the top. He unfolded the letter carefully. It was a rejection notice. No open positions. No funding for new teachers. No help. So she walked all that way for nothing. Elijah stared at the letter until the ink blurred. Then he folded it and put it back. When she woke again, she asked his name. "Elijah," he said simply. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice brittle. "Sarah Green." He nodded. The name suited her. By the 3rd day, she insisted on getting out of bed. Rosa scolded her. But Elijah just watched, arms crossed, a flicker of amusement playing at the corner of his mouth as Sarah stubbornly made her way to the front porch. She sat there for hours, eyes fixed on the horizon. She told him about the school she used to run, about the children she taught, about the girl named Lila, who couldn't read a single word when she arrived, but could write poetry by the end of the year. "I thought I could help again," Sarah said. "That's why I walked. They said there was a school up north. I didn't know it was a lie." Elijah stayed silent. He wanted to tell her about the letter, about how she'd walked 100 miles chasing something that didn't exist. But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he asked, "Why keep going?" She looked at him then. Really looked. Because if I stop, what was it all for? He felt something shift inside him. A crack in the stone he'd built around his heart. That night, long after she went to sleep, he stood by the cottonwood tree in the back, the one with 2 small gravestones beneath it. He hadn't spoken to them in years. But tonight, he did. "I found someone," he said. "She walked farther than anyone should have. And she's got more heart than I ever did." The wind rustled the leaves like an answer. And Elijah, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel alone. The nights had grown softer. Sarah sat beneath the porch light, a shawl around her shoulders, watching stars bloom across the wide Texas sky. Crickets sang in the brush beyond the fence, and the wind carried the faint scent of horses and mesquite. Inside, dishes clinked, Rosa humming a lullaby from her youth. It should have felt like peace. But inside her chest, something pressed tight. Elijah had given her space. Too much space. He kept his distance, polite but distant, as though any warmth might undo the quiet balance they had somehow built. And Sarah, grateful as she was, knew there were things he wasn't saying, just as she wasn't telling him everything either. That morning, she'd asked to help with chores. Elijah refused at first. But when he found her tutoring one of the ranch boys, Sam, who couldn't read the branding ledger, he said nothing, only watched from the barn door, his arms folded, a ghost of a smile on his face. She taught with the same fire she had in her schoolhouse, using twigs to draw letters in the dirt, coaxing the boy's confidence from behind his silence. Sam beamed when he finally sounded out cattle without stumbling. Later that evening, Elijah handed her a worn-out reader's primer, old and dusty. "Thought this might help," he said. Their fingers brushed, just for a second, and Sarah looked up into those guarded eyes and wondered what kind of man kept every part of himself behind a door no one was allowed to open. That night, She lay in bed, unable to sleep. The rejection letter haunted her. It remained tucked at the bottom of her satchel, where it had always been, but she never told Elijah about it. She didn't have to. He already knew. The way he avoided any mention of her destination. The way he'd never asked what the letter had said. It was too careful. Too precise. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that he had read it, or that he hadn't told her. By morning, the tension had grown heavy. Sarah found him near the stables, checking the hooves of a mare that wouldn't settle. "Elijah," she said softly, "did you read my letter?" He didn't look up, just ran a brush gently down the horse's flank. "Yes," he said. A long silence stretched between them. Her throat tightened. "So you knew that I walked for nothing." His hand slowed. "You didn't walk for nothing. I was chasing a lie." "No," he said, finally meeting her gaze. "You were chasing hope, and that's never a lie." Sarah stepped back, the wind catching her skirt. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice low. "Why let me pretend?" "Because I've buried truth before, Sarah," he said. "And sometimes it's kindled in the world." She didn't reply. She turned and walked away, her hands trembling. All the gratitude, all the comfort of the last few weeks, shattered by that one betrayal. Not that he had read the letter, but that he had decided what she could handle, like she was broken, like she wasn't strong enough to bear the truth. Inside, Rosa met her with a look that saw too much. "You think he did it to protect you," Rosa said gently. "But he did it because he saw something in you he hasn't seen in a long time." "And what's that?" Sarah snapped. "Fire." Sarah sank into the kitchen chair. Her hands gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. "You should know," Rosa added. "He hasn't let anyone that close since she died." Sarah blinked. "His wife?" Rosa nodded. 10 years ago. She was carrying their first child. Complications. Neither made it. Grief wrapped itself around Sarah like cold fog. Suddenly, his silences made sense. The distance, the guarded stares. He hadn't just been hiding the truth about her letter. He'd been hiding himself. She stood without a word and walked toward the back of the house, past the porch, past the fence, until she found the cottonwood tree. 2 gravestones sat beneath it. Simple, unadorned. Sarah knelt before them, fingers brushing the worn engravings. One name was faded beyond recognition. The other was still clear. Grace Carter. She stayed there until the wind whispered through the branches like a hymn. The next morning, Elijah found her sitting at the breakfast table, sipping coffee with her hands wrapped around the mug. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," she replied. He hesitated. "I just didn't want to see you lose that spark." Sarah looked up. Her eyes were tired but steady. "I lost a lot before I came here, Elijah, but not that. Not really. The thing I almost lost was trust." He nodded slowly. She pushed the mug aside and stood. "I came here to teach, and I still want to. I just don't want to do it alone anymore." He looked at her for a long time, and in his eyes, something shifted. The walls didn't fall, but a door cracked open. "I don't know how to help," he admitted. "Start by walking with me," she said, "wherever this road goes." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elijah reached out and took her hand, not tightly, not possessively, just steady. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah Green didn't feel like she had to walk alone. Children gathered beneath the old oak tree, just past the west fence, their faces flushed with sunlight and curiosity. Some were barefoot. Some wore oversized hand-me-down boots, but all of them sat cross-legged in the grass, eyes fixed on a woman standing before them. Sarah held a piece of chalk in one hand and a wooden slate in the other, her voice gentle but sure as she formed letters in the air. "Hey!" she said, drawing the curve slowly. Like apple. Like always keep trying. The children echoed her, some shy, some bold, all of them leaning forward like every sound from her mouth was something they'd never heard before. Behind them, a handmade sign swayed in the breeze. Carter Plain Schoolhouse. Classes in session. It wasn't a real schoolhouse. Not yet. Just a whitewashed wall, a roof supported by beams salvaged from the ranch's old barn, and benches crafted by hand. But it was more than enough. Elijah stood nearby, arms crossed, leaning against a fence post. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but his eyes didn't leave her. Not once. Weeks had passed since Sarah learned the truth about the letter. Since Elijah admitted he knew her destination never existed. But instead of retreating, he had surprised her in the most unexpected way. He acted, quietly, without announcement or pride. He'd met with ranchers, gathered supplies, and offered the land behind his house for her dream. They never spoke much about it. They didn't need to. Every nail driven into wood, every chair carved, every book ordered from the county library was a conversation. He hadn't just believed in her. He'd chosen to walk beside her. One afternoon, as the children ran inside for lemonade, Sarah stayed behind to gather slates. Elijah stepped forward, offering a stack of worn readers. "You're building something here," he said. She looked up at him. "We're building something." He looked down at her hands, dusty, ink-stained, alive. "Do you ever think about going back?" She shook her head. "Back is gone. But forward is wide open." He nodded, understanding more than he said. In the evenings, the ranch grew quiet. Sarah often found herself in the nursery, now transformed into a tiny reading room. The crib had been replaced by shelves, the rocking chair repainted. She didn't change everything. Some things she kept untouched, like the hand-sewn curtain still hanging in the window, or the name carved into the windowsill. Grace. One night, she found Elijah there, seated in the corner with a child on his lap, Sam, now reading halting sentences aloud. "You promised you'd help with the math lessons," Sarah said, leaning against the doorframe. Elijah grinned. "I'm a man of my word." She walked in and took a seat opposite him. Sam continued reading, unaware of the exchange, until Elijah gently patted his back and told him to run along. As Sam disappeared down the hallway, silence settled between them. "Elijah," she said, "do you ever wonder if we're allowed to start over?" He looked at her a long time. "Only every day." She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, she felt her chest open wide enough to let light in. They didn't fall in love like in the stories. No dramatic declarations or sudden embraces. They simply grew closer, like two trees leaning toward each other through seasons, slow and steady. One morning, Sarah brought out a new sign, the place by the school. Painted in deep blue, it read, "For those who walk so others could fly." The children clapped when they saw it. Elijah only nodded, though his throat tightened when he read the words. Later that day, Sarah returned to the fence line at the edge of the ranch, where the lamb at the open road she had once nearly died walking. In her hand were the shoes she had worn. Cracked leather, soles nearly gone, still carrying the dust of 100 desperate miles. She didn't cry. Not this time. She took the shoes and hung them gently over the fence post. Elijah came up behind her, leaving something behind. She nodded. A reminder. He looked out over the road. "You could have died out there." "But I didn't," she said. "And maybe that's a miracle." He didn't argue, just stood beside her in silence, letting the wind carry their stillness. "I thought I was alone," she said, "that no one would ever see me. But you did." He looked down at her, eyes dark and steady. "Maybe we saved each other." The sky turned gold around them. the wind playing softly through grass. Behind them, laughter erupted from the schoolhouse, and somewhere a bell rang. Sarah turned toward the sound. Come on, the kids are waiting. They walked back side by side, their shadows long, their pace unhurried. Neither knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, neither of them feared it, because empty miles had led her to something she never expected. Not just shelter, not just a job, but a life. A full one, made of broken pieces stitched together by grace, grit, and a man who had learned how to hope again. And as the door of the schoolhouse opened to welcome them in, the past stayed behind, hanging gently on the fence, watching them go.